channels around which these norms could evolve. Now, I will be the moderator for the session today, and as a brief introduction to the blue economy, I would like to give a very broad definition of the concept. It is emerging, and for all intents and purposes, the blue economy aims to identify better ways to encourage better stewardship of our oceanic resources. It also tries to promote sustainability, inclusivity, and reduce environmental risks. Now, this topic holds particular relevance to me as well, coming from the Seychelles Islands. The Seychelles has been lauded as a key driver of blue growth. We were one of the first countries to launch the world's blue bond in 2018, which was a nature for debt swap that aimed to support sustainable marine and fisheries projects. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce a very lauded panel to discuss this topic at hand. The British High Commissioner to Bangladesh, Mr. Robert Dickson, welcome. Major General Abdurrahman, the Director General of BIISS, welcome. Professor Daud Hassan, Director for the International Center for Ocean Governance, Western Sydney University, welcome. And Ryosuke Hanada, a research fellow from the Japan Institute of International Affairs. So if I may kick this off, I will first turn to the High Commissioner. Perhaps let's start with the discussion on sustainability. We have countries like Bangladesh and those in the Indo-Pacific who are increasingly being viewed as disruptors who will script new norms and perhaps incubate new institutions as well. But in your view, how can the region evolve norms that will balance both the need for sustainability as well as prosperity?
Well, thank you very much. Delighted to be here. We were told backstage when we were being briefed that we should make our conversational inputs very snappy, so I'm going to do that. And if I may, I'm going to talk about three things quickly. The first is global norms, the second thing is regional norms and structures, and the third thing is non-regional, because obviously we as the UK are non-regional, but we are very interested for reasons that I'll mention in just a second. And I'm delighted that we feature, of course, quite prominently on the banner, because we are supporters of this event, which I think is extremely useful. In my 8 months in Dhaka, there's been nothing quite like it, and I think it's brilliant that we have a major international gathering to look at these really critical issues. In terms of sustainability, it's absolutely crucial, because the risk with the blue economy is that we lose it before we've really seized its opportunities. And every day we're reminded about the threats that exist to the blue economy in terms of overfishing, pollution, plastics, acidification. So there's an enormous range of threats. And what we need, clearly, is a global response to those threats, because the nature of threats to the oceans are, by definition, transnational. So we've got to have global norms. And there's a very interesting proposal for the Convention on Biodiversity 2020, which we are strong supporters of, which is 30-30. It's to protect 30% of the world's marine areas by 2030. And if you look at what's needed for the oceans, the blue economy to thrive, it's respite. There's a remarkably good example of this here in Bangladesh, where the Hilsa fishery very deliberately takes pauses in its fishing activity, and that has a remarkable impact on enabling the Hilsa to regenerate and preserve the stocks. And the idea of the 30-30 is that if you set aside 30% of the world's oceans and basically don't allow exploitation in that 30%, the remaining 70% becomes much more productive. So in terms of a global norm, that is a really important point which we are taking into the Convention on Biodiversity next year. And that links to a point that was made in one of the previous sessions by my colleague from Delhi about COP26, the Glasgow Convention next year. Because if you're looking at the threats that exist to the oceans also in terms of acidification, threats to the oceans, threats to the atmosphere, very closely linked. So COP26 Glasgow, absolutely crucial. So those global norms, we think, are part of the issue. But the second point is regional. It's very striking how, coming from Europe, where we have very well developed, if somewhat at the moment contested, regional structures, here there isn't really anything like, there's nothing that's anything like as strong. And it's very interesting if you look at a real opportunity, I think, for Bangladesh to take IORA and the chairmanship that Bangladesh will be picking up of IORA from 2021, and you combine that with BIMSTEC, which I was really interested to see State Minister Sharia Alam mention during his presentation. I think there's an opportunity for Bangladesh to have a really strong convening role in pulling together the sort of institutions that are going to be needed in order to really deliver cooperation on the blue economy right round the Indian Ocean region. And I just give a brief shout out as chair in office for the Commonwealth in this area, because there are some of the sectoral things that the Commonwealth does could also be highly relevant in this sphere, because the Commonwealth, it's not Not all the members of IORA are members of the Commonwealth, but a lot of them are, and the Commonwealth provides a very useful, non-threatening forum for a lot of discussion of these sort of issues. So that's the global, that's the regional. And just briefly, obviously the UK is not a regional part of this. I mean, we're a long way away. But nonetheless, in a globalized world, it's really striking, as High Commissioner in Bangladesh, how very closely involved we as a major non-regional player are in the affairs of this region. We're the third largest investor in the region. We're major development partners for a lot of the countries in the region. And we also have a continuing and active role in security. So we were heavily involved in the activity that was taken to largely successfully suppress piracy in the Western Indian Ocean. We have a base at Bahrain, which is going to enable us to be much more present than we have been until recently in the naval role. And we are supporting the capabilities of regional partners as they develop the capacities that they're going to need to be more active players in helping to preserve and deliver security, which is crucial to making the most of the blue economy. So that's it. Global, regional, non-regional, and really useful to have it brought together at the Dhaka Global Dialogue. So thank you to everyone who's done that.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. That was very snappy as well, and quite brief in terms of covering all the important aspects of the question that I asked. So well done. Perhaps a very interesting concept that you raised was leveraging on the capabilities of regional partners. And just to bring in Mr. Hassan into that conversation about regional partnership as well. So how can organizations like the Indian Ocean Rim Association, the African Union, ASEAN, how can they collaborate to leverage the opportunities presented by the blue economy, bearing in mind that the concept is fairly emerging and it's new to some countries as well? What is your take on this, sir?
Oh, thank you, moderator. It's an absolute privilege to be part of this international dialogue, Dhaka International Dialogue. And first of all, I would like to congratulate the organizing committee to keep a session like this, which is Destination Blue, Unlocking the Potential of Oceans. I would like to mention about the importance of ocean and why we need to protect the ocean and why we are talking about blue economy and what's the relationship between blue economy and sustainable blue economy and how we can achieve the sustainable blue economy. And what are the important principles, the management approaches that can be taken into account to implement and also reach the destination of blue. So as we all here, we know that we don't actually live in a land planet, we live in an ocean planet. 72% Earth's surface is covered by water. And 70% world oxygen is coming from the water. 80% plant and animal life lies in the water. And oceans are important medium for transportation and recreation. And it is providing significant support to the humankind. So it is very important for the sake of current and future generation, we need to protect the ocean. So there was a time that oceans were thought that wasteless thing. You can dump whatever you want to, you can use it whatever you want to, but of the global group of scientific aspect of marine pollution, it has been identified that ocean's assimilative capacity is limited. So we have used the ocean in the past. Now it is the time to give the ocean back. So how can you do this? Sustainable ocean governance in the way. So we are talking about blue economy as an emerging concept. The blue economy simply denotes that sustainable use of ocean resources for economic growth and also to improve livelihood by maintaining the ecosystem of the health. And when you are talking about sustainable blue economy refers to socio-economic benefit for the current generation as well as future generation by contributing to the food security, improve livelihood, and also improving job security and employment. So all these are linked with Sustainable Development Goal 2013. In particular, when we are talking about oceans and when we are talking about blue economy, then Goal 14 is important, which talk about maintenance and restoration of marine environment and also the intrinsic value of the marine ecosystem. So now we have different approaches, different ideas in the past, but since Rio 20, that yesterday we just talked about that Johannesburg Sustainable Development Summit for the implementation of environment management principles, that where this emerging concept, the blue economy, came into play. Now, that blue economy will not be achieved until there are some important management principles in place particularly that the idea I'm advocating, also working at different parts of the world oceans, with particular reference to important management principle, which is called ecosystem-based management. And in order to implement ecosystem-based management, it is important to introduce and implement marine spatial planning. So given the marine spatial planning is simply, it's a political process of analyzing and also allocating the ocean spaces for human activities, and purpose is to achieve ecological, social, and economic benefit. And in order to implement ecosystem-based management, because ecosystem-based management is providing an important framework to implement the principles that is integrated, comprehensive, with a view to protect the marine ecosystem in a comprehensive manner. So, and also another important aspect is the zoning, ocean zoning, which Australian, the Great Barrier Reef is a pioneer example. So if you can divide the ocean area in certain zonings, then you can allocate a certain human activities, that which area is permitted for using the ocean for certain purposes, which area is not. Due to the emergence of blue economy, ocean uses has increased significantly. And not necessarily all these increased use are compatible to each other. Most of the cases, they are conflicting to each other. For example, if we keep a shipping lane where there is significant potential for fisheries, it will affect the fisheries. So we need to make the plan that which area is good for fisheries, which area is good for shipping, which area is good for renewable energy, for example. So, and if we, the zoning is a system that also implementation tool is a toolkit for the implementation of ecosystem-based management and marine spatial planning. Now, I just want to touch that given the geographical nature of the Bay of Bengal that we're talking about, and our Honorable Prime Minister is very interested to achieve and also adhere this agenda of blue economy, that and also that this is an important forum to mention that whether we can take into account transboundary dimension of MSP with the dialogue with India and also Myanmar to some extent. Recently, not recently, last year before, that I had the opportunity to involve as an external consultant with the Finnish government and Swedish government, that Sweden and Finnish has did marine spatial planning in the territorial sea, but they are now working together to develop transboundary within their exclusive economic zone. So given the nature of the Bay of Bengal as a semi-enclosed sea and also South China Sea, the number of countries in the world already developed 4 out of 5 countries are covered by marine spatial planning, but most of the cases developed countries. But even you're talking about Indo-Pacific region, for example, China, Taiwan, Japan developed marine spatial planning, particularly Japan. I would like to give an example of Bangladesh perspective and Indian perspective as well. So Japan adopted the Basic Ocean Plan 2007. After the Fukushima disaster, they adopted a Basic Ocean Plan where they included the important principles, including marine spatial planning, to make offshore energy facilities. Now, and also Seychelles already implemented marine spatial planning. So now, Japan's slogan in the Ocean Plan 2013 said that from a country protected by ocean to a country that protects the oceans. So it includes that importance of the oceans, and obviously we need to work together. It's an absolute opportunity to adhere this agenda, and I hope we can do this if we can develop a framework. And obviously that I would prefer to see that India and Bangladesh to develop a comprehensive ocean policy. And I will be happy to talk more about what is happening in the Great Barrier Reef in Australia in particular, and how this blue economy agenda, and particularly marine spatial planning agenda, is developed and bringing billions of dollars in the Australian economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to perhaps just unpack a little bit around marine spatial planning in greater detail, because the Seychelles was one of the countries to actually implement marine spatial planning, wherein phase 1 of that policy, and we're now looking to integrate phase 2. So in your opinion, how effective is marine spatial planning for blue growth? And what sort of specific country cases can you give us in terms of countries that have implemented them, countries that are actually working through going into implementing these frameworks, and how effective are they?
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you. It's a very important question. I can just simply starting with, for example, USA. So most of us here, we know the Gulf of Mexico disaster. When this happened, then there was a people demand to take into account ecosystem-based management. And because of the demand, United States government developed a new policy in terms of ocean affairs, which include marine spatial planning. And I already gave an example to Japan that is introducing marine spatial planning based on the Fukushima disaster. And with particular reference to Australia, that is when we're talking about marine spatial planning, because in order to implement blue economy, you need to have marine spatial planning in national context and transboundary context. Now, the marine spatial planning in the Great Barrier Reef is a pioneer example that started with the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Act, 1974. But it was taken that long before that, after the Law of the Sea, 1982. And for example, in Bangladesh context, that our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, adopted the Territorial Waters and Maritime Zones Act in 1974, which was the stepping stone of the regional ocean governance. But we need to develop more in that context. But I'm coming back to Australia. Since 1974, there were 12 times amendments have been made to make it more comprehensive and adjust important management principles and approaches, the toolkits. So now it is comprehensive, and the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Act is established just to govern the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. The authority was established. So, and coming back to the other parts, like South China Sea, in particular China, and China already implementing marine spatial planning through a different name, Maritime Functioning Zone, and Taiwan also doing the same. And in terms of other countries like Baltic Sea, where I have worked frequently in Baltic Sea and Northeast Atlantic in the North Sea. So Baltic Sea countries also develop integrated maritime policy, development of framework strategy, and also the British High Commission probably knows that European directives, the EEC directives, which is compulsory state concern to develop Marine Spatial Planning Act within the EEC directives. So this is the way it's developing, and it has given a legal dimension, and it has given a significant importance from political point of view and economic point of view. And I can see some prospect in the Bay of Bengal region if we can make, for example, even Territorial Waters and Maritime Zones Act more comprehensive and taking into account our recent development like ecosystem-based management and also marine spatial planning with appropriate strategies and policies, and also in terms of strategically and diplomatically in collaboration with India and Myanmar, we can go further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hassan. And I think you've given me an excellent segue by mentioning the South China Sea and Japan, because we have the perfect panelist to actually answer those questions. So, Mr. Hanada, what can you tell us in terms of your experience with your research in the South China Sea area? Perhaps I could also ask you to just give me some background and your views on how the Indo-Pacific states can leverage the blue economy to meet their needs as well, just given that your research is quite experienced in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator, and thank you, organizers, for inviting this young scholar all the way from Tokyo to this Dhaka. This is the first time for my visit. From looking at the situation from Japan, which is one maritime state, one of the most important issue is the principle in the maritime security issue. And which principle? And that's definitely the rule of law. That is what I'm going to talk in the maybe next 5 minutes or so. Prime Minister Abe made a speech in 2014 at the Shangri-La Dialogue, and then he proposed the 3 principles of the rule of law at the sea. He said states should not use force or coercion. Second principle is the states should make a maritime claim based on the law, existing international law, and the states should resolve those disputes or differences through the international law. Those are 3 principles that Prime Minister Abe proposed. And I think one of the significant concern about this maritime security in this Indo-Pacific region is that this principle is challenged by some countries' behavior. And Mr. Hassan already mentioned the South China Sea issue. I think that that's the typical example, or it's like the front line of the issue. I think here is not a place to criticize China's or neighboring countries' territorial claims or maritime boundary claim, but I think one of the important things is that the arbitration based on the UNCLOS Annex 7 was made in July 2016, which rejected the China's claim over the 9-dash line. China previously claimed that the historical rights over the 9-dash line, but the arbitration clearly denied it. Arbitration, of course, didn't make any clear delineations on the South China Sea because it's outside of the jurisdiction of arbitration. Then the problem was that China rejected or ignored the arbitration. And in this context, we should remember the case between the Bangladesh and India. The arbitration was made in 2014, if I remember correctly, and it started in 2009. And of course, any arbitration result is not favorable or satisfactory to both sides. Both sides have some dissatisfaction. But at the end of the day, if I observe the India-Bangladesh case, both sides abide by the arbitration and behave accordingly. And that certainly stabilized the Bay of Bengal and served to the security, of this Indo-Pacific region as a whole. So recalling that great example, the South China Sea issue and China's rejection of arbitration is significantly problematic for this rules-based order. And the rules-based order is actually indispensable for small and medium-sized economy, or even including Japan. Because if we just compete in the rule of jungle or power politics, well, we have to always bend in front of the big powers and repeatedly make the concessions in our legitimate claims. But as we already have the UNCLOS since 1984, and it certainly protects the right of the legitimate rights of the countries, and also provided the due process of resolving the issues. I think, South China Sea issue should be also considered in this context, and I think that China should definitely abide by the arbitration. But unfortunately, after 3 years, I can't see any constructive behavior from Chinese side. So, as I said, I'm not here to criticize the Chinese claim itself, but I think I certainly criticize the Chinese behavior in the South China Sea. And in this, Bangladesh case and Indian behaviors after the arbitration is actually followed by all the countries in the South China Sea littoral states. Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, Brunei, and Indonesia to some extent have some different claims over the EEZ, exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea. And unfortunately, they are still struggling to resolve their maritime boundary issue among themselves. China and the ASEAN is now negotiating a code of conduct, and which I think important. But without resolving internal dispute among the Southeast Asian countries, it'd be a little bit difficult for them to unite and then, negotiate a code of conduct vis-a-vis China. And as already Professor Hassan said, South China Sea is very important from different perspectives. 1/3 of the trade passed through the South China Sea. Coral Triangle, the coral reef in the Spratly and the Paracel, is actually extremely important environment resources for this region. And then littoral states, the South China Sea is the richest fishery place. So again, the emergence of the traditional security or the great power competition in this region is destabilizing the concept of blue economy or the ideal form of the regional cooperation. And we have to think about this issue. And so I'm quite happy to take other questions later.
Thank you, Mr. Hanada. The issue of the South China Sea, I believe, is a fairly new introduction as a topic to this platform. I was wondering if any of the panelists wanted to respond to the intervention. Please.
Right. Is it working? Yeah. I think I haven't spoken yet, but I think this is the point where I can just talk a little bit. You see, the norms that we are looking for, the purpose for which we all are sitting here today. If you look at the depth of this, then you see that there are smaller states, smaller nations who really can't, propose or raise their voice for their solving their problem alone. So they need some kind of international platform where they can, propose their options. So the international organizations, those are there in the world, the established international organizations that can resolve a lot of problems like many of the smaller states, smaller nations they face. So I think Mr. Hanada said one thing that after the Bangladesh and India has resolved the maritime dispute, that has become is an example to many other countries. And South China Sea is an area where we see the smaller states has a long-standing problem with China. And they all virtually are proposing the similar kind of model to resolve the problem like what we have between Bangladesh and India, and of course with Bangladesh and Myanmar too. So I think this is the issue which, what I'm trying to say is that the larger power, they must accommodate some kind of responsibility within them, even at the cost of, losing a little bit. Like what yesterday during the initial panel, Mr. Ram Madhav said, that after the maritime dispute problem has been resolved by Bangladesh and India, there were many people in the India itself, they said that India has lost to some extent. But, for a greater cause, for a global cause, so you need to, find out some ways where there will be a little bit of loss or a little bit of gain, but the larger country, they need to take the responsibility. I think China has much to do if we have to make some kind of long-standing solution of the South China Sea problem.
So,
yes, thank you.
Next, yeah.
Mr. Hassan, please.
so thanks. It's an important. So I think that I would like to come back to as an international lawyer and the law of the sea expert. It's an inherent weakness of international law. And also when you're talking about the law of the sea convention 1982, that part 15, which talks about dispute settlement mechanism, that it's a concept base. And also the compulsory dispute mechanism system is in place. So for example, we are fortunate here, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and India, because we were able to solve this problem. But it's not happening in other parts of the world, not only South China Sea, in many countries in Latin America, because I have a couple of PhD students working in the delimitation issue, and they're facing this situation. Now, but whatever the outcome, what General says that, but international law is progressing. And nowadays, under the international law, that there is a principle of customary international law, that duty to cooperate for the sake of humanity. The certain issues that, at the beginning session, talking about the Westphalia, the Treaty of Westphalia, because the rise of, I have written something on theories of international law, that the Treaty of Westphalia and rise of territorial states, that concept has gone. So we are living in a restrictive sovereignty area, that not absolute sovereignty. So for the sake of the current generation and future generation, when we're talking about sustainability and all these things, that we need to sacrifice certain extents, and international community will come to and play under customary international law. No, doesn't matter. For example, that in the high seas, there was a time, and High Commissioner already mentioned that conservation of biological diversity beyond the national jurisdiction, which is coming to play next year, because the high sea was open to all. Now, because of the demand of the society, because of the importance of the ocean, you cannot do whatever you want to do. And that's why that even flag of convenience, that states are using the flag. I'm just US flag, that means that I'm powerful, so nobody can say that. But again, it is now saying that that is the past now. So we need to take into account customary international law, and if there is any wrong, even piracy or whatever, illegal trafficking and human trafficking or any kind of illegal activities, then coastal states also have the responsibility to play with that, not only flag states. So jurisdiction is not absolute anymore. So this is examples that we can go further. Mechanisms are there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hassan. High Commissioner, you look like you've got something on your mind. Would you like to add?
Well, just to observe that, I think the South China Sea is an example of how things can go wrong, because you've got the basic rules, the role of UNCLOS, principles like freedom of navigation that are being very clearly challenged. And I think one of the advantages in this region is that actually there isn't an equivalent situation. There is still a situation where it is realistic to talk about open, inclusive, prosperous, all of those things. And so there's a tremendous opportunity if the structures can be got right, now. And I think by now, I mean, within the next couple of years, it's really important before we end up with a situation where, if you like, sort of hegemonic claims have begun to erode the basic principles. This is a moment when the principles can still be preserved in this region, and it's a really good opportunity. And as I said, there is an example in the South China Sea and potentially elsewhere in the Arctic where you see, what happens when you have competition without rules and how that liberates the strong. In the words of Thucydides, I think it was, say, the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. In this region, that's not happening, but there's a very good opportunity to make sure that the rules prevent it from happening.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. And perhaps I will come to Major General Raman. So you were quoted yesterday as saying that the Dhaka Global Governance is giving us a platform where all nations can gain from partnership and collaboration. And Mr. Hassan has just brought in very valuable words, a duty to cooperate. So perhaps let's touch on the need for joint exploration, the need to collaborate and cooperate with other countries when it comes to blue economy ventures. In your view, how vital will trust and cooperation be when it comes to creating these new areas?
Right, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak something about this. I think the two things that you have raised, one is about the trust that we have in developing our own country in the international system. The other one is purely about the blue economy itself that Bangladesh is pursuing. Let me first talk about the blue economy that has been already spoken enough by our, Secretary Maritime yesterday, Rear Admiral Khurshid. I think just to let you know that immediately after resolving the crisis between the dispute between Bangladesh India and Bangladesh Myanmar, the day we have received the result, the government of Bangladesh under the leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister, we have massively floated the idea of the blue economy, and because we largely believe that without taking the advantage of the marine resources that we have now, the opportunity that has been offered, the target of becoming a middle-income country or a developed country, as we have forecasted by 2041, it will be a little difficult. So I think Bangladesh is one of the countries which has taken a lead of, bringing the idea of blue economy. One of the leading country to float the idea of blue economy, and it has also developed a blue economy cell which coordinates all the activities of the relevant ministries so that it doesn't go haywire. This is one thing, and we strongly believe that as like many other countries, a large percentage of the growth, GDP growth, is being contributed by the resources from the ocean or the marine. And our Prime Minister clearly said that this utilization of sea resources or maritime boundary resources, this will help us in many ways, like job employment or climate change and economic activities limited, poverty alleviation, and there are many, many more things. So this is now going to be part of our total economic development that we are pursuing. But what point that I was trying to say, I'll link to that, is at times we see that uneven distribution of trade and the benefit exists where only a handful countries, they become, they get the benefit of economy from the maritime exchanges and transportation and trade and commerce. So here lies the importance of jointness, or where smaller nations can also have an equal stake with the larger partner. So that's why I say that if the regional or sub-regional initiative like we have now in this part of the world, like BIMSTEC, or for that matter, let's say we have SAARC, these are the regional forum where countries like Bangladesh can, say strongly, raise their voice and contribute also to the overall management. So here lies a issue that there should be international organizations like where these are the countries can participate and they can also get into the benefit more than what they individually are gaining now. So these are the two things that I would like to bring to the notice. And another one thing that I would like to talk is, which is not relevant to the geopolitics that we have been talking, but it is certainly is very, very important on the issue of sustaining the world itself. That we know that our total economy or everything is dependent on the use of energy. This is one thing that we are not talking. I think I should talk about it. So the fossil fuel is diminishing, and there are all over the fight going on for the fossil fuel. So now people are looking for the alternative, that is renewable energy. So I would suggest that I'll take 1 minute time, just, one thing that has been recently forecasted by a few scientists in California, they call it Vestal biomass. This Vestal biomass is nothing, it is but basically using the seaweed, biomass for converting into a strong renewable energy. I think this is another area where smaller countries like us alone cannot really do much, so they need to take, the larger country need to take smaller countries like Bangladesh on board and do something more to sustain for a longer run. Thank you.
Major General, thank you very much. You've raised a very interesting word there with this jointness. And on that point, I would like to invite the audience to join us. If you have any questions, could you please make your way to the microphone? I would request that you make your questions as brief as possible. I would also request that you state your name and the organization you are representing. And if you can direct your question to a specific panelist, please do so. I think given our time restraints, we can take 2 to 3 questions at best. So please make your way to the microphone, and whoever who is standing there, you win.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
I am Fazle from Bangladesh, of the National Youth and Social Council. My first question to His Excellency, the British High Commissioner of Bangladesh. You mentioned about the Commonwealth, and in this Indo-Pacific concept, how you think the Commonwealth can cooperate us. I am product of Commonwealth Youth Program. That makes me to receive the outstanding young person of the world in 1987. This only won the Best Youth Award that Bangladesh achieved. And then my question to General Rahman, that you mentioned about especially the smaller countries, very good. How you can think Bangladesh can cooperate and others, these smaller countries can develop, like Singapore has developed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The gentleman at the very back, please.
Thank you. My name is Mahfouz Kur. I'm from BISS. I'm actually thinking about the ocean in the ocean. I mean, the unlimited potential of the ocean in the 21st century. So, but if we think about the sustainable harvesting of the marine resources, so that's a big concept for the countries like Bangladesh. So, can we think of a joint initiative of the Bay of Bengal and this region, especially in the scientific arena? For example, if we consider the issue of the marine fisheries, so we still don't have the age structure, so we don't know how to, in fact, sustainably harvest the marine, in fact, the fisheries and other resources. So can we have the scientific cooperation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the gentleman standing at the microphone. Thank you. That will be all the questions we'll be able to take, just given our time constraints.
Hello,
Go ahead.
I'm Imran Chaudhry.
I'm
thank
so
you, Chair.
sorry. The gentleman in the very front. My apologies.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just brief comment first for the Japanese panelists, especially you concerning you talking about the South China Sea issue. First, I will say actually South China Sea issues it becomes international hot issues. Actually, was after 2011. You have to know the background because the United States adopted a new policy that is rebalancing to Asians. Actually, before that, there is no such hot issues in South China Sea issues. And another problem is you mentioned about China's behavior in territory boundary issues, something like that. And I want to remind you, actually, it's the Japanese government changed the stakeholder in East China Sea issues. You know, when China-Japan established foreign relations in 1972, two sides tried to put the difference. And it's in 2020, Japanese government purchased 3 of the islands. That's why China have to respond. And also the final question for the Indian panelists. One of the facts you have to know, China actually resolved all the boundary issue with its 14 neighboring, except India and Bhutan. So how do you explain that? Sorry.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we will start with the last question first. Mr. Hanada.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions from my Chinese colleague about the South China Sea. I often hear that from the Chinese scholars that China is just reacting to the situation or other countries' coercion or the change of status quo. And I don't take that position. I think in terms of South China Sea, you said it since 2011. Yeah, that's true to some extent. But you just, we can go back to any time. But like the China-Vietnam War, for example, or after the U.S. withdrawal from the Philippines, what China did. So it's not constructive to criticize each other from which country caused the problem. But I think that's why I didn't mention about the history of the South China Sea. But as far as we have the arbitration which is legitimate under the UNCLOS, and the following or abiding by that arbitration serves to the global and the regional security, why not doing it? And as Major General already clearly, rightly mentioned, that the major country or the great power has a more responsibility to protect this regional stability. So China, because it's becoming big and more responsible, and naturally has also the obligation to protect this rules-based international order, I think. And I'm not too naive to just focus on the international law. I think we also have to think about the power politics as well, military power, the Coast Guard ships, law enforcement agencies' capabilities. So Japan, together with the British, United States, Australia, India, and other Southeast Asian states as well. It's inclusive. We are cooperating for capacity building. It's not building their navies or militaries or missiles. We are helping them to have the capable law enforcement agency and the maritime domain awareness capability to monitor what's going on in the South China Sea or even Bay of Bengal, around the Malacca Strait or around the Andaman Sea. So I think that's my point. We have to, in order to protect the rules-based order, first of all, we have to stick to the principle, but also understand the power politics as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hanada. High Commissioner, may I come to you for your response to the question asked by the gentleman?
On the Commonwealth, yeah. What I would say on that is that the Commonwealth is not the whole answer to this, but it provides part of the answer, because the Commonwealth hugely contributes to connectivity. If you look particularly at the Indian Ocean region, right round from South Africa up the East African coast, through Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, through much of Southeast Asia, down to Australia, those are all Commonwealth countries. And Commonwealth countries, that means they're signed up to a set of principles around sustainability, democracy, which are a very good starting point for the sort of conversations that need to happen. And they have, on the whole, common legal frameworks, a common legal heritage. So, as I said, the Commonwealth is not going to solve this on its own, but Commonwealth structures and principles and connectivity can definitely help to deliver the sort of constructive approach that's going to be needed, because what comes out so strongly from this conversation is the enormous potential of the blue economy. But in order to make the most of that potential, we have to look after it, starting now. Otherwise, we're going to just lose it. And we have to have the right structures and rules for agreeing to do it. And there's lots of different elements to that. And I think the challenge that comes out of this conversation is working out which of those elements to take forward in a coherent way. And I think a lot of the elements of the answers are here, but a lot more work is going to be needed to come up with one structure that can work for everybody.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. The final question was one directed to the panel as a whole, and perhaps I would ask each member of the panel to give me their thoughts on this question. It was a question related to sustainable harvesting and the need for joint initiatives in this region. So perhaps we'll close with something closer to home. If each member of the panel could please answer the question, as well as give us some closing thoughts, such that we may very nicely close out this session. Thank you. Mr. Hassan?
Yeah, I just want to talk about the marine, harvesting issue that obviously strategy is important, but when you are talking about the law of the sea and that's the regime, the two important terms have been used in the law of the sea convention, which is called total allowable catch and also maximum sustainable yield. So in order to implement that, you need to develop a strategy with other neighboring countries. For example, that we have IORA, and IORA recently introduced a action plan, that is 2017 to 2021, and also IORA has established ongoing blue economy ministerial workshop, meetings. So the nation states can take part and develop a strategy that how to deal with sustainable fishing, because if sustainable fishing is not exist within the territorial sea as well as the exclusive economic zone, then our future will be endangered, because the 90% coastal fisheries lies within the coastal areas of a particular country. So it is very important. Now, in the concluding remark, I would like to say that we need to have a comprehensive ocean policy, and we need to develop a human capacity, sustainable human capacity, so that blue economy agenda can be take further through training and education. And at the same time, probably we can encourage and promote ocean entrepreneurs who can also take part in the blue economy initiatives. And I think given the importance of the oceans, we can, for example, different TV channels can also introduce a special program on oceans, so that at a certain age, for example, 10 to 20 years, they can learn about the oceans and importance of the oceans, not for the current generation and for the sake of future generation. I think that could be a useful mechanism that we can deliver. And at the end, again I'm saying that the transboundary framework is important. Not necessarily it has to be binding, it could be non-binding, but a framework has to be there with particular reference to blue economy or sustainable ocean governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hassan. High Commissioner, if you please.
Thank you. Well, obviously the important point about fish is that they move around. So if you're going to, he said rather obviously, so if you're going to make sustainable use of this, it has to be a set of international rules. And just to return to where I began at the beginning, we think that the biggest contribution that could be made multinationally would be through the Convention on Biodiversity next year. So 30% of the oceans as marine reserves, effectively, giving the fish stocks, the oceans the opportunity to recuperate, 30% by 2030. That commitment would be enormously significant if we can make it collectively at the Convention on Biodiversity next year. That's the one thing that would make the biggest difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Major General.
All right. I will not answer the one that you have talked about, the harvesting. I think it has been spoken well. But I'll summarize by saying that, jointness, why jointness? We're talking about jointness because each of the country, whether bigger, smaller, weaker, powerful, everyone has certain kind of strength and also kind of weaknesses. So in any joint platform, if we combine all our strength together, we can achieve the maximum benefit out of any initiative. So that is the beauty of any joint platform. And in joint platform, nobody will be loser. So there will be a percentage of, 59, 49, 39, that kind of, but nobody will be loser, everybody will be gainer. So I think this is one. And number two thing, last thing that I would like to say is that the global system or the global community must respect all sorts of international law, international norms, and the mandate itself. Until and unless we have respect for that, perhaps we will not achieve what we are trying to achieve through a dialogue of this nature that is called Dhaka Global Dialogue. So I think with that I would like to end, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Major General. And Mr. Hanada, would you like to close off?
Yes, I think I talked too much about South China Sea and stimulated the discussion. So just looking at the different region from the Japanese point of view, we also have to look at the Pacific, South Pacific or Pacific Island countries. Although, we are now in Dhaka, and Dhaka is quite far from the Pacific, but there's a quite number of countries which are vulnerable to environmental issues and increasing sea level. And Japan is now doing the PALM, the Pacific Island Cooperation, which also provides the strong infrastructure to those countries. And in that sense, well, it's a little bit related to the connectivity discussion we had in the morning, but in this area, we can have the more platform for cooperation among major countries. Well, if China builds a good port and have the environmentally resilient infrastructure, that's completely fine. And Japan and China is now cooperating in the third country for infrastructure building. If the project satisfies the four conditions like openness, transparency, economic viability, and financial sustainability of the recipient countries. So that would be, the maritime issue should be also connected to the connectivity issue as well. And that creates the space for cooperation or more innovative discussion among ourselves. So in that sense, I have to also a little bit be critical on some countries' decision on the Paris Agreement, because in order to make the free and open Indo-Pacific, or free, open, inclusive, and rules-based Indo-Pacific, we cannot undermine the small and medium-sized countries' benefit or interest. So U.S. decision to withdraw from Paris Agreement is definitely a little bit contradicting to the Japanese version of the free and open Indo-Pacific. And finally, about the high sea, I was asked to speak a little bit longer, so I'm trying to do. But finally, sorry for going back to the arbitration things, but South China Sea arbitration said that all the maritime features in the South China Sea are not island. So that this entitlement decision creates the huge area of high sea in the center of the South China Sea. Although we still have to negotiate the EEZs, but if we consider this a central area of the high sea as a benefit, I think there's a quite huge possibility for China and the other major countries can cooperate. But if any country thinks this existence of a high sea as contradicting to their national interest, that is a little bit against the regional or global interest, I think. So now is the time, I think we have to not just think about the national interest, but also the regional interest and global interest. And I think this kind of platform, Track 1.5 dialogue, or even the different platform would be, I think, beneficial. Maybe we can invite others to join.
Indeed. So ladies and gentlemen, I have been asked to keep this going for a little bit longer until I get the cue to end this session. So we will be doing one more round. I think we're all very lucky to get even more insight from our panelists. So perhaps I would go with, what is your vision on how Bangladesh can unlock the potential for blue economy moving forward? And perhaps you could also respond to Mr. Hanada's take as well, because I found it quite interesting. So if any one of you would like to jump in and keep the conversation rolling, by all means, please do so.
So I just want to add one important thing in terms of blue economy. But recently, that is developed through European Investment Bank and also European Commission, as well as Prince of Wales International Sustainable Unit and also WWF, which has developed recently the blue economy funding initiatives, finance initiatives. And also, they developed the finance principles as well. Actually, there is a conference next week in Paris on this particular issue. So nation states in this area, for example, IORA can take an important role. And if not IORA, then within the Bay of Bengal, like Bangladesh, India, and Myanmar, can also think about to implement the blue economy perspective and sustainable ocean governance. In addition to legal framework and strategies, the financial strategies could be an important vehicle to deliver more in this particular aspect. That's my concluding remark.
Well, just to say that in all sorts of ways, Bangladesh is the most extraordinary development model for the rest of the world. I mean, that's widely remarked on. And in some ways, aquaculture here has actually been a remarkable success, both the relatively sustainable management of ocean fisheries, but also the development of fish farming, if you like, sort of artificial methods. So I think Bangladesh has a lot to offer in that sense. And the other thing I do think, as I said in my remarks at the beginning, I think there is a remarkable political moment potentially for Bangladesh, which Minister Alam referred to, where Bangladesh has the chairmanship of IORA in 2021 and is also the home of BIMSTEC. And we've mentioned BIMSTEC. I visited BIMSTEC. I think it's an organization with a lot of unrealized potential, but it's a structure which could really be coming into its own. So with increasing interest, in a way, rather than having to invent these things from scratch, a lot of these structures that exist already can be repurposed, re-energized, and knitted together. So I think on the technical side, there's a lot of Bangladeshi experience that's highly relevant in this area as in so many others. And I think there's a particular political opportunity coming up in the early part of the next decade.
Thank you.
I'll just take 3 points forward as a means of, and I would say that there is a way forward for taking the blue economy. One is the accounting framework, the other one is called legal framework, and the third one is called research initiative or research framework. These are the 3 things I think I would suggest. If we take into account, I think we can find a lot of better solution for making a sustainable blue economy development.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Rule-based order, a duty to cooperate, and a very optimistic view of blue growth in Bangladesh. Could you please join me in giving our panels a round of applause for an excellent series of discussions?